This year we are looking at the world's religions, and up until now it's been fairly effortless. We've looked at Hinduism, Buddhism, Confucianism, and Taoism. What makes it effortless, we're using Houston Smith's book, The World's Religions, so I'm sort of following those chapters, and his intention from the beginning was not how these religions are actually being lived, because we know there's always challenges, but what's the ideal of every religion? So we've been talking about the ideals of every religion. He has this great quote where he said, the problem with religion is people got involved. So the ideals are great, and then people get involved, and we just mess it all up. And yet still, it's been fairly easy to talk about Hinduism and Buddhism and Taoism and Confucianism is because we have very little personal relationship with it. We didn't grow up in a culture filled with Hinduism, Buddhism, Taoism, and Confucianism. So we can talk about those ideals, and we don't have a lot of baggage around it. In fact, I think a lot of Americans go over to India or Japan or learn Buddhism and Hinduism here is because there is no baggage. We can just learn the spiritual aspect, the spiritual pieces of it, without all that stuff attached. Shunryu Suzuki came over here from Japan for that exact reason. In Japan, Buddhism is ever present in their culture and society, and so people had their baggage and their stuff around Buddhism, and he just felt the spirit of Buddhism was missing, and so he came over to America where it was still so new that people came, they were choosing Buddhism, they weren't born into Buddhism, so it was a choice, and they become fresh. We don't have all the stuff around it. We don't have any cultural, historical baggage around Buddhism, so we come to it freely, and he loved that with the American students. Now, between July and December, we're going into religions that we do have baggage with. We have Islam, Judaism, Christianity, and we're also doing the indigenous, in November we'll do some of the indigenous traditions. And so it's hard to talk about it purely from the idealistic, what are the ideals of the religion, without also remembering that we have this historical, cultural influence of these religions in our life. So it makes it a little more challenging. As I've mentioned before, where our suffering, where our difficulties come is the gap between the ideal and the actual. So it's easy to talk about the ideal, but most of us can also say, and here's the actual, and the gap is that the suffering is the gap in between. And so as we talk about these further religions, we are not only aware of the ideals, but we're talking about Islam, and we had a Supreme Court hearing just validated the ban on Muslim travel. And wherever I don't want to get into the politics, wherever you land on it, the point is it's impacting our culture. We see it in the news. It's hard to talk about Islam in just the pure idealism without also recognizing that we're hearing about it in our everyday culture. And we probably know more Muslims, maybe, than we do Buddhists. I don't know. Actually, I shouldn't say that. Who knows? I don't know in the work life. There's certainly more Muslims in our country than Buddhists or Hindus. So I was approaching this, and it was a little challenging. Now, the content of Islam is beautiful, and we're going to get in next week to the 5 pillars of Islam. And I remember when I read this book 25 years ago, I still remember the 5 pillars. They're beautiful. The content of Islam is beautiful. But Houston Smith begins with just introducing how Muslim Islam begins, and that already begins us in the history of it. So I want to talk about it, but recognizing that we do have this ideal, we have the actual, our struggles in between. And also, as we get more into religion, what this is, I also want to make one other point, is that I recognize so many people there's a mass exodus from religion happening in America. People are tired of the dogmatism, people fighting for their religion, fighting for their theology. And a lot of people in our community say, well, I'm spiritual but not religious. I'm done with the organizational aspect. I want the spiritual part. We feel God. We want the God part, but we don't want all the stuff that comes with it. And that becomes a challenge because what you find even in spiritual communities is that stuff shows up. As John Kabat-Zinn says, wherever you go, there you are. You can go to an ashram, which is all about spirit, which isn't about theology, but they become full of stuff because we're human beings. And that goes back to Houston Smith's idea, religion is great until humans get involved. That in fact we can't we want to leave religion because we want to leave the stuff behind, but then we find the stuff in politics, we find the stuff in our workplace, we find the stuff in our family. It's impossible to leave our humanity. We're stuck with this very difficult thing called humanity. And I think it's why I feel quieter today, because sometimes it's nice just to be in the spiritual aspect, just to be in the wholeness and the perfection of pure spirit that is in through it is all creation, that we are made in the image and likeness of love. It is all love, and we just get to swim and dance in this wonderful feeling tone of spirituality and the highness of it, but we still have the humanity of it. And there's no way to start moving into these religions without also addressing our humanity, and how that can sometimes be challenging and difficult. And there's no easy answers. I remember when Star Wars came out, my dad had read an article that our great appeal towards Star Wars, it was simple. You had it easy, black and white. There were the good guys and the bad guys, and there was no gray matter. Yeah, gray matter in between, and that we longed for simpler days where we could say, they're bad, I'm good. But we know that's not true anymore. So we get into the complexity of everything. So it's harder to speak about it with ease and grace. And it's not just Islam, it's going to be to the end of the year, because these are all traditions that every one of us have had some sort of connection with in our life. We have history with it. So let's begin with Islam, how it began. Islam includes Judaism and Christianity. It's considered an Abrahamic religion. That Abraham was married to Sarah. Sarah had no children, so then he married Hagar. Hagar had Ishmael. And then Sarah had her son, who was Isaac. The Jewish tradition lineage comes from Isaac, from Sarah to Isaac. The Islam tradition comes from Hagar and Ishmael. So they are the descendants of Ishmael. So they are considered an Abrahamic religion. They include Judaism and Christianity in their texts, in their cosmology. They consider Jesus a prophet. They don't reject either the Old Testament or New Testament, but include all of it. And then they consider Muhammad a prophet, and that he was the last prophet of this tradition. They do not consider Muhammad in the same way that Christians consider Jesus, which is that he is God. So long before we got more familiar with Islam, there was a period in American history where we called it Mohammedism, and Islam got very upset with that because Muhammad absolutely said, I am not God. I am just a vehicle that it came through. This message came through. I am simply a prophet, just like in the Jewish prophets. And there is a difference, and so the religion is not about me, as Christianity is about Jesus. The religion is about what came through, called the Quran. So Muhammad was born in 570 AD. His father died before he was born. His mother died after a year or two. And then he went to his grandfather, and his grandfather died when he was 6. So then he went to his uncle's family, and his uncle's family embraced him and welcomed him. But they say he grew up a very gentle and kind and compassionate soul because of all this loss that he had. That his heart was open to people who suffered. His gentle, warm, always sought out to help those who didn't have. He cared about the struggling. So he had this very sensitive heart. But he was born into a time, very much like we heard with Confucius, who was born into a time where the morals had gone crazy, everybody was out for themselves. Similar experience with Muhammad. He was born into the culture, everyone was out for themselves, materiality was huge, everyone just wanted their pleasure, gambling, sex, everything was just a free-for-all. There was no really overall religion, moral ethics, so people were just, and there was no governing society at this point, so everything was sort of for free-for-all, and people were just fighting for themselves and their tribe. He found this very disconcerting as a very gentle, sweet soul, so he would go off into a mountain, into a cave, just to retreat from all the chaos and the stuff that he found very disconcerting to his gentle soul. And it is sitting in this cave where he started to hear the voice of God, the voice of the divine. There were, at first, it was a polytheistic culture, so there's many gods, and so at first he was feeling like, well, are these different gods speaking to me? And then after listening for a while, he realized, no, there's only one, and the whole message is that there's only one. He called the being that was speaking through him Gabriel, and that the message is that there's only one God. And they called it Allah. We call it God. Jews call it Jehovah. Hindus call it Brahma. Buddhists call it the ground of all being. Taoists call it the way. So we all have different names for it, but it's still the same idea that keeps coming up. They call it the axial age, where there's these divine revelations coming all over the world. There's only one. There's many forms of it, but there's only one, and this is the message he's getting. Islam means the peace that comes to one who surrenders to God, to Allah. So peace sometimes it's just translated as peace, but it's actually very specifically means the peace that comes when we surrender our life to God, to Allah. It's beautiful, isn't it? It's all about, and that's what this Islam, and when we hear about the 5 pillars, it's just, the 5 pillars are about a way to live your life in a constant surrender to God. It is so beautiful, so devotional. We know how Rumi could write such gorgeous poems when it comes from such a beautiful, devotional, loving tradition. So I look forward to that part. But the challenges we get to, and I think come up immediately, and so it challenges ourselves. It's challenged me as I've been with it. Muhammad is this prophet. He always, as I said, he never thought of himself as a enlightened being. He said, I don't do any miracles. There are a lot of people going around, it's his time, as they do in all times we do miracles. He says, I profess no miracles, I profess no specialness. The only miracle is this Quran that has moved through me, because he was basically illiterate. How did this incredibly beautiful text move through me? It is not of me. The miracle is the Quran. Islam is all about the Quran. It's not about Muhammad. Muhammad was just here to teach the Quran, to open it up to people. And so he had a small group of followers, and he keeps preaching about it and talking about it, and people are beginning to see the beauty of it and are beginning to come to him. And there's Mecca, and Mecca had their economic trade, and they're beginning to find this a little bit threatening. And Medina, who's another city, they're struggling, and they don't have any leadership. So they're looking and listening to what Muhammad's saying, and they're saying, this guy's really great. He could really help us. So they ask him to be the leader of Medina. And so there's a word, Hiraj, I think, and that's the beginning of when Muhammad makes his trip to Medina to become the leader. People from Mecca try to stop him. They don't, and he becomes the leader of Medina. I honestly don't know if I should have looked it up, if it's Medina or Medina. And peace becomes Medina, where you had all these different factions, and he brought with him this idea of peace and how it pervades. And there were 5 distinct groups in Medina at the time. 3 of them were Jewish, actually, and he brought peace with all of it. He was very gentle. He was a judge. He was the leader of the community. He practiced from this gentleness, from the kindness and the wisdom that starts pouring through him. He creates this incredible, peaceful society. They begin to thrive even more, because now they're all working collectively together. They're not all operating for me, mine, and they're becoming a community. The economic powers to be in Mecca are getting very concerned about this, and this is where it starts to challenge us, or at least it challenged me. I'll say that. So there becomes a battle, an actual physical war between Mecca and Medina, and ultimately Muhammad wins. He becomes a general. So he wins this battle, and so he takes over Mecca, and again, more peace is spread. All these places, all these little battles that were happening between people individually, he's creating this greater sense of peace. He is himself in harmony with what he's teaching. If you surrender your life to God, there is peace, and there's peace for all beings. They didn't all have to become, he wasn't trying to convert everyone to Muslims, to Islam, to the teaching of the Quran. He was just putting the principles into practice as a leader of these cities. And then it grows and expands. They start taking over other places. And so one of the criticisms I heard as a child, and I think sometimes these things stay with us, was, well, Muhammad, how can you consider him a spiritual leader, because he's a general and he's engaging in war, in battle? Could you imagine Jesus getting on a horse and battling and killing people? And so I remember that was one of the first things I heard. And so those things stick with us. This is where we have to be with, we have the ideal, but then we have the actual, and we have our history. And so I had my history with this, that I don't know if any of you have had that history. So I had to be with that. And I was thinking about being a Christian or being raised Christian. And the reason why I know about Jesus and the reason why many of us know about who were raised Christian Jews is because of war. That Constantine, when he decided he thought everyone should be Christian, and so he, as an emperor of Rome, he converted everyone to Christian. He made everyone convert to Christianity, and he conquered countries to make them Christian. We are Christian because countries were conquered and converted to Christianity. War was used, right? As a country, we've been through war ourselves, so it was not, we have 4th of July, we have our principles, and then we fight for those principles. We have the Declaration of Independence. We had the Civil War. Incredible amounts of people died. I remember learning and growing up that the Battle of Gettysburg, more people died in the battle of, that's just one battle of 5 years. Civil War is 5 years. One battle of Gettysburg, the same amount of people died in that Battle of Gettysburg as in the entire war of the Vietnam. I mean, and this is all in one country. We lost so many people, families ripped apart as they're fighting one another. And what are they fighting for? Oneness, to keep those principles in oneness and not to separate, not to go apart. And that's what is so, I just was thinking about the amazing similarities of this, that there's this fight. We use war to create oneness. But is that appropriate? And that's the question. Is it appropriate? Are we glad we had the Civil War? Are we glad that we had so many people die to keep? And then you think of World War II. You know, we went to war for values, for principles. Is that okay? And then I think of the Bhagavad Gita. How many of you are familiar with the Bhagavad Gita? So many of you. The Bhagavad Gita is the main, they have many scriptural texts in Hinduism, but that's one of the main primary ones. Every Hindu teacher has their translation of Bhagavad Gita. The Bhagavad Gita's entire purpose is Arjuna is a warrior, bless you. Arjuna is a warrior, and he's fighting his side of the family, he's fighting the other side of the family, and clearly in this story, the other side of the family is the bad side. But he just says, I think what they're doing is wrong, but I'm not willing to fight anymore. I'm not going to kill my family members, my cousins, for this principle. It's just wrong to kill. And he goes off to the side, and he sits, and I'm going to sit this one out. And the entire Bhagavad Gita story is Krishna coming to Arjuna and saying, no, you have to fight. You have to get into the battle, and you have to engage. That's what this world is for. And so Krishna reveals to Arjuna the entire cosmos of how it works. And there's creation, and there's sustaining, and there's destruction. And we're all part of the cycle, and it's all of our job to play our roles, to participate fully in the unfolding, because if not, the darkness starts to get darker and darker. And so Krishna is pushing Arjuna to get back in the battle, to go back into war. So can a spiritual leader at the same time be someone who's engaged in aggressiveness? We teach a new thought that the power and the presence of pure spirit is in, through, and as all creation. All creation. So we can turn our heads away and say, that's not happening. I'm just going to be spiritual over here. But spirit's still over there, whether we turn our heads away or not. Spirit's in the middle of all the challenges that we are experiencing in our country right now. We can either look at it or not look at it. We have all our different perspectives, but spirit's there. We can say, I believe in the power of separation of church and state, but we still have principles. And those principles are to uphold the highest ideals, and we need to participate in them. Or at least that's the idea, that unless we are actually called to be monastics, which is, I think, a really powerful calling, and I don't think it's irrelevant for people to be, I definitely think the monastics of our world who remove themselves and are just in prayer all the time, I thank God that they're there. But unless we have a specific call to be a monastic, the other side of that is we're here to engage. And that's where it gets difficult. That's why I've been quieter today, because it's hard. It is so much harder than to just sit in prayer and meditation and to be in love and to be in that wonderful, holy, sacred place where everything is whole, perfect, and complete. It is hard to engage with humanity because we are so imperfect. We have so many weaknesses. We have so many different perspectives. I was thinking about the beginning of this country. We have these wonderful ideals, and we talk about our forefathers who created them. And then I was looking at them as examples, because we have these ideals of ideal, the actual, ideal, and the actual. Our ideals. John Adams and Thomas Jefferson at the beginning of this country were incredibly close friends, fighting for these principles, creating and writing, and we have the Declaration of Independence, and they are on the same side, believing and passionately fighting for these principles to become as a country, and by the time they are on their deathbed, they won't even talk to each other. They are so angry and hate each other, and it's even asked, will they bridge this anger at their deathbed? And they both refuse and say no. These are not people who went to their other side peaceful within themselves, and yet we have these high ideals, but within even these high ideals, there's arguments. What does that even mean? How does this show up? Thomas Jefferson had slaves. George Washington had slaves, set them free when he died, but he had them. So there's the ideals and there's the actual. And this is the constant battle of life. The other way of looking at the Bhagavad Gita is it's not just the war outside, it's the war within us. It's that constant war of our own ideals and then the actual. We have our own spiritual ideas to be whole, perfect, and complete, to be absolutely loving all of the time, to say all the right things, to be let God use me and I'm moving. And then we have the actual of all those places in a day that I can fall short of that. In a day, in a week where I can fall short of it. Or I passionately believe I am speaking about it, and how can someone in my family or someone of my friends believe something so completely different? We both have the same ideal, and yet our understanding of it is so different. How can that be? And how do I live at peace with someone who feels who believes the same thing I do, and yet has such a different interpretation? And this is the challenge of living in our humanity. The question is how do we be with that? There's this mass exodus from religion, but I still believe it's because it's a mass exodus from our humanity. We don't want to deal with stuff, because I guarantee you can leave religion, but the next thing you're going to go into, you're going to deal with the same stuff, whether it's in the political world, in your work life, because humanity is difficult. I was recently inspired by How to Be With It, by Dan Reynolds, the lead singer of Imagine Dragons. Have any of you seen that documentary on HBO, Believer?
Love Loud.
Yeah, Love Loud, yes. So it's an HBO documentary, and I just happened to catch it. I didn't know anything about it. I heard some of Imagine Dragons songs from Julian. They're great songs. But I didn't know about any of this until I saw this documentary. He is a huge rock star, apparently, for our younger generation. And they have great songs. Look it up, Imagine Dragons. He also is a Mormon. And you'll see the whole story in the documentary. And he grew up Mormon. He grew up in a big Mormon family. Everyone in his family practices Mormon. And he loves his religion. He loves it. The Mormonism religion, there's so much love and warmth and familiar family connection, and it's deep, and they feel the love of God. People who are raised in Mormon, it's not just theory. You can experience that with them, the kindness and the generosity, that they really are trying to express love all the time. And yet there becomes this policy in Mormonism where it is sinful to be gay. And then there was another rock star, and do you remember his name?
Neon Trees.
It's Neon Trees, it's the band, and I can't remember the Tyler, correct. Thank you. So Tyler's the lead singer, and he did come out as gay. He's also Mormon. And at first, he just came out and assumed he would be accepted and his boyfriend would be accepted in the Mormon religion, and it wasn't. The Mormon religion often will say, it's okay to be gay as long as you don't act on it. So if you come out and say you're gay, that's fine, but just don't ever act on it. Still act heterosexual, or we will try. It's something that you were taught and you can be untaught it. So it's all sort of those traditional ideas. So this guy in Imagine Dragons, Dan Reynolds, he's about 2 years into it, and he contacts Tyler, and he says, this is just wrong. I said, I've just been standing by watching this. And he's married with 2 children. And I feel like by not saying anything, it's wrong. And so they create this concert that they put on last year in Provo, Utah, called Love Loud. And it was this massive concert to accept lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer in the Mormon community, to say you are loved, you are here, and they're trying to motivate the powers to be in Mormonism to change. And the whole thing is a beautiful story, because the suicide rate among LGBTQ teens within Mormonism has skyrocketed. The more Mormonism has gotten clearer that it's a sin, the higher the suicide rate has gone up. And so this is not okay. We have to stand for our youth. We have to stand for the inclusion of, and that's why they call it Love Loud. People asked him along the way, why don't you just leave Mormonism? Why? I mean, if you're so against what they stand for, just leave. And he said, no, I love this religion. I love it, but there's things that need to change. I'm staying engaging. He's basically being Arjuna. I'm going to stay and I'm going to fight. He said he was a missionary for 2 years, and I love how he turns it around. He said, the gifts that Mormonism gave me by being a missionary, I am now using. I had 100 doors. For every one door that opened, 100 doors were slammed on me when I'm knocking on their doors. He said, I'm tenacious. What I learned from that was tenacious. I don't care how many doors slam on me. I'm keeping at this, and we're going to keep doing these Love Loud concerts every year until it's no longer necessary. That's someone who's engaged, who's saying, I refuse to let people in my community, in my religious organization, to be rejected. But I'm also not going to reject my religion. I love my religion. But I'm going to fight for those people who are being rejected, who are being ousted. And I look at that as an example, as we're looking at at the problems and saying, Islam is beautiful. It is a beautiful religion. And to reject Muslims for the way some Muslims are interpreting it is missing the point. To be like the United States, we have these ideals, and people interpret these ideals and are using it in ways that we may be uncomfortable with, that don't feel like they're in alignment with our ideals. Do we reject the principles? Do we say, well, these principles are all wrong? No, we reject the interpretation of them, and we fight for the ideals of it. And I think ultimately, when we have the ideals and the actual, what we're often being asked to do is to still fight for those ideals. We can come up short again and again, but we still want to constantly strive to live at that highest possibility, because those highest ideals are beautiful and are stunning. The principles of this country are beautiful and stunning. The principles of Islam are beautiful and stunning. The principles of all these religions are beautiful and stunning. And it is our job to fight for those principles, to fight for ourselves. We have battles within ourselves. And so, yes, I fall short all the time. Every single day I fall short. It's really annoying. I get to the end of the day and I'm like, I said things, I did things I wish I hadn't done. Why do I have to be so freaking human? I don't like it. I really want to be perfect. And that actually leads me to one, I just had this other thought. People always say, but I'm not a saint. But here's what I've learned about saints, okay? Because I've been reading a lot about these early Christian saints. The thing that makes them saints is that they own that they're not perfect. They never once go, I am perfect, look at me, I never make any errors. And in fact, what makes them so beautiful is they're constantly acknowledging their weaknesses and saying, Spirit, take over because I don't have that strength. So when we say, oh, I'm not a saint, yes, we are, because none of us are perfect. What makes saints beautiful is the constant ownership that we're not perfect. So I constantly fall short of who I want to be, but I'm still going to turn my heart, and that's what Islam is asking us to do, over and over, turn my heart, my entire being over to the divine, to give myself over and over to Allah, to give myself in love to that which transcends all my human weaknesses. And I am going to do my best, regardless of how other people are misinterpreting and using these same ideas for negative, for bad things that I don't agree with. I am going to fight for what I do believe in. I'm going to fight for myself to live it in more alignment, and I'm going to stand for the highest ideals of Islam. I'm going to stand for the highest ideals of New Thought. I'm going to stand for the highest ideals of this country. We have the 4th of July coming up. That is something we're celebrating. Justice and equality for all. Hello. How amazing is the principles of this country. Religious freedom. It's extraordinary. We're here to celebrate that and stand for that without shame. We don't want to have shame about the principles of our country. Muslims should not have to feel shame around their religion because it's a beautiful religion, even though it is often being used for horrible things. Christianity has been used for horrible things, hasn't it? You know, we can twist anything. We can take any scripture phrase. We can use any phrase anywhere and twist it and use it for negative reasons. We all have that capability. But the ideal is where we're always striving for. And what I truly believe about humanity, about all humanity, is that it just gets distorted, but our deepest heart longing is to live from this ideal. We are all drawn to that ideal because we feel the truth of it. We feel the wholeness of it. We want the highest good for not only ourselves, but for the entire planet. And so sometimes the way we understand that, because we're so clouded ourselves, comes out wrong. But I am going to be unwavering, as Dan Reynolds is with Mormonism, as Arjuna was asked to be, as any of us are asked to be, to continue every day to do the best that I can to stand for the light and the truth and the principles in which I believe in which I care for. And as I do this for myself, I honor and respect all those people who are standing for principles that are for the highest good of all. The highest good of all. The highest good of all. Not us versus them, but the highest good of all. And I believe the reason why Muhammad was able to create peace when he did take over the places that he became leader of, became fully at peace because he was for the highest good of all. He did not convert everybody. He did not convert the Jews to Islam, but he created peace because he was serving Allah. And when we serve that one power, one presence, we get a little bit humble and we recognize peace. Peace comes from serving the one. And so I invite us to be that peace this week, to stand in that peace regardless of situation and circumstance, to stand in the peace as we move into the 4th of July. We stand in that wholeness and that perfection of the principles of this country, recognizing there are many ways to interpret it, but we stand in alignment that whatever the highest ideal is, the highest form is the highest good for all people, equality and justice for all. Equality and justice for all. The highest good for all, we stand in that, we celebrate it, and we know that as we continue to do it, more and more people stand in that power and that presence, it will show up, it will happen. And we're not afraid. We don't walk away, we don't hide, we don't quit. We stay with it, we focus, and we center. So I invite us all now to enter into that one power and that one presence in prayer. Stand in the truth of who we are, for the highest good of all beings. And any place within ourselves that is at war, that feels separation, that feels there's one part of ourselves that does deserve to be rejected because it's not enough, it's not good enough. Even because we feel like it's harmful. Then it needs even more love. Those parts of ourselves that we feel can even do our own self-damage, it needs more love, not less love. It needs more love. And so today, we allow all the love that has ever been and ever will be to pour forth through us, through those parts of us that are already beautiful, strong, whole, perfect, and complete. And to pour even more, as we heard in our beautiful reading this morning, to pour in those places that need it the most, that feel wounded, that feel angry, that feel terrified, that feel those strong, intense emotions. We allow the love to be poured forth through, and as those areas of our own interior world. Those battles within our own being. We allow love to accept all of us, to allow that wonderful, compassionate healing. And even as we heal these interior battles that are happening within us, we allow ourselves to be vehicles for the exterior battles to be healed, to believe it is possible, and that religions no longer need to be at war with one another, because at the highest ideal, there is no war. And so we every day shift from that place of otherness, of our humanity, into those ideals. It is possible for all religions to coexist in love, because there is only one power, one presence, and every religion at their core recognizes this power and this presence here and now. And so today we celebrate and give thanks for that wonderful power and presence, that we are going to use the language of Islam and call it Allah, is in through in each and every one of us. We give our lives to this power and presence called Allah. It is infinitely good, it is infinitely loving, it is infinitely peaceful. It is infinitely compassionate, and it has no walls, it has no separation. This beautiful presence called Allah includes all the world's religions, it includes all faith traditions, it includes all sexual orientations, it includes all races and cultures. This Allah, this presence, this power is pure, unconditional, unlimited love. And we are it now. We are made in the image and likeness of this pure love. Any fears are healed even now by this presence called Allah. We are that place, we are that home. There are no walls, there is no separation. There is only one. There is only one. There is only one. And this is the place, the highest ideal, that is even in the lowest common denominator. There is only one. We are it now. We are all of it. We accept all of it. We accept all of it now. And we give thanks here and now for the power and the presence of pure spirit, and release this word into the law of life, knowing as it is spoken, this oneness is fulfilled through and as each of us here today. In deep abiding peace, I let it be, and invite us all to say together, and so